The humid air of the St. Helena Parish Courthouse in the spring of 1897 was thick with the dust of renovation and the ghosts of the past. Workmen tasked with updating the aging structure pried away a rotten section of lath and plaster near the foundation, their tools stumbling upon an anomaly not of construction, but of concealment. Tucked deep within the wall's cavity, sealed away from light and air for over 4 decades, was a single, folded piece of paper. It was not a love letter or a forgotten deed to land, but a receipt for a human being. The local historians who were summoned, men like Elias Thorpe, whose own family had deep roots in the parish, handled the brittle paper with trembling hands. The script, faded but still legible, documented a transaction from March 14, 1853. It recorded the sale of a Negro female, approximately 23 years of age, currently with child, from Duncan Fairholme of Bellamont Plantation to one Isaiah Mercer. The price was not the typical hundreds of dollars such a person would command, but a sum so derisive it felt like a typographical error. 12 cents. Not $12, 12 cents. The price of a loaf of bread or a day's newspaper. The document was perfectly legal, bearing the officious signature of Nathaniel Pewitt, the parish recorder, and witnessed by 7 other men whose names were pillars of the local community. But it was the back of the receipt that turned the historical curiosity into a ticking bomb. Scrawled in a different, more frantic hand, a hand later identified as William Fairholme's, Duncan's brother, was a message. It was not a lengthy confession, but a desperate, philosophical cry. It spoke of a love that defied the brutal logic of their world, of a brother's cruelty that used the law as a cudgel, and ended with a damning indictment. The greatest evil is not the evil done by wicked men, but the evil permitted by good men who lack the courage to act. Elias Thorpe and his colleagues looked at each other, the weight of the paper feeling like a ton of lead. They understood immediately that this was not just a historical artifact. It was a key to a story that could shatter families, rewrite local histories, and expose a rot that many preferred to believe had been buried with the Confederacy. The descendants of those 7 witnesses were now prominent bankers, lawyers, and politicians. The Fairholme name, though diminished, still carried weight. To reveal this was to declare war on the carefully curated memory of the parish. In a silent, unanimous decision, they chose silence. They resealed the receipt in the wall, committing themselves and their discovery to a renewed darkness. They chose the peace of the present over the violent truth of the past, ensuring the story would die with them, or so they thought. Hook for next part. But walls cannot hold secrets forever, and the truth about that 12-cent sale was far more sinister than a simple transaction. It was the culmination of a plan born not of commerce, but of a deep, brotherly hatred that festered in the opulent halls of Bellamont Plantation. The real story begins not with a receipt, but with a woman named Clara, whose quiet dignity became a crime punishable by a price tag of contempt. To understand the profound cruelty of the 12-cent sale, one must first understand the world of St. Helena Parish in 1853. It was a place of stark contrasts, where the breathtaking beauty of moss-draped live oaks and fertile river soil existed alongside the profound brutality of the slave labor system. Wealth was measured in human capital, and the law existed first and foremost to protect that property. In this world, Duncan Fairholme was a king. Heir to the vast Bellamont Plantation, he was a man who believed in order, hierarchy, and the absolute authority granted to him by his race, his class, and the legal code. Into his domain came Clara, a woman who possessed a dangerous quality in a slave: intelligence. She had been purchased years earlier from a Virginia tobacco plantation, ripped from her mother and siblings in a traumatic auction that left permanent scars on her soul. Despite laws forbidding it, she had learned to read, picking up the skill by observing the Fairholme children's lessons. She was quiet, observant, and carried herself with a stillness that Duncan initially mistook for submission, but later recognized as a silent judgment. Her dignity was a constant, subtle rebuke to his worldview. The fragile equilibrium of Bellamont shattered when Clara became pregnant. The father was not Duncan, nor any enslaved field hand, but his own younger brother, William. William was Duncan's opposite in every way. Where Duncan was rigid and severe, William was romantic and troubled by conscience. He drank too much and read clandestine abolitionist pamphlets, his idealism curdling into self-loathing for his participation in the system. His relationship with Clara began innocently, born of lonely conversations when she delivered his meals. It evolved into something deeper, a connection built on shared humanity that transgressed every social and legal boundary of their time. When Duncan discovered the pregnancy, his rage was volcanic. It was not jealousy, but a profound sense of violation. William had not just slept with a slave. He had emotionally invested in property, muddying the clear, cold waters of ownership with the messy sentiment of love. He had threatened the very foundation of their power, the ability to see human beings as instruments of production. William, in a fit of misguided nobility, went to Duncan and offered to buy Clara's freedom, to take her north. This was the final insult. Duncan's revenge was not a crime of passion, but a masterpiece of psychological torture, meticulously crafted within the bounds of the law. He would not sell Clara to a trader who would take her to Georgia or Alabama. He would sell her publicly, on the courthouse steps, for a price that would annihilate her humanity in the eyes of the community. By setting the minimum bid at 12 cents, he sent a clear message. This woman is worthless. She is damaged, diseased, refuse. He knew no legitimate buyer would touch her, fearing she was insane or terminally ill. The only bidder would be his overseer, Silas Guthrie, a man known for his brutality. Duncan's plan was to force William to watch the woman he loved be legally transferred to a life of guaranteed suffering, all for the price of a handful of pennies. It was a punishment designed to destroy two people with a single bureaucratic stroke. Hook for next part. As the sun rose on the morning of the auction, William Fairholme was already gone, having fled after a desperate, failed plea to the one man who could have stopped the sale. But the courthouse steps held another surprise, a stranger whose arrival would turn Duncan's cruel game into a high-stakes gamble for Clara's very soul.
The auction proceeded under a slate-grey sky, as if heaven itself could not bear to look directly upon the scene. Nathaniel Pute, his voice a dry administrative drone, read the description of Clara as if she were livestock. The mention of 12 cents sent a ripple of confusion and morbid curiosity through the crowd. Potential buyers shook their heads, losing interest. As planned, Silas Guthrie lingered near the front, waiting for the crowd to thin so he could claim his prize for a pittance. But then a voice cut through the murmur from the back of the crowd. 12 cents. All heads turned to the straggletal lean and dust-covered from travel, yet carrying an air of purpose that set him apart. He gave his name as Isaiah Mercer. The bidding that followed was a bizarre and tense affair. Guthrie, flustered and forced to reveal his interest, was drawn into a duel, the price escalating to an unthinkable $10 before he dropped out, bound by Duncan's order not to draw attention. Clara was sold to Mercer. As Mercer led her away, Duncan emerged from the courthouse, his composure cracked. He confronted Mercer, trying to intimidate him to understand this variable he had not accounted for. Mercer's calm defiance was a shield. He stated the transaction was legal and witnessed, and with Clara, he walked away to a waiting wagon. Once on the road, Mercer revealed a shocking truth. He was not a random benefactor. 8 years prior, he had been a low-level operative for the slave trader who sold Clara in Virginia. He had witnessed her trauma, her stoic dignity as her family was torn apart, and the memory had haunted him, eventually driving him to renounce his work and join abolitionist circles. William Fairholme, in his final, desperate act, had sought out these circles and paid Mercer to rescue Clara to bring her to a safe house in Illinois. He also handed Clara a deed of manumission, a promise of freedom bearing his own signature as her new owner. But as they traveled north, Clara's sharp instincts, honed by a lifetime of survival, sensed a dissonance. The rescue felt too scripted. Duncan Fairholme was not a man who made mistakes. He laid traps. That night, by a campfire deep in the Louisiana pine woods, she confronted Mercer. Her accusation hung in the air. "This is not real. You are part of his plan." Mercer, after a long silence, confirmed her worst fears. Duncan had discovered William's plan. The entire escape was a setup designed to be intercepted by slave catchers. Duncan's goal was to make William's attempt at rescue the very instrument of Clara's doom, proving that sentimentality led only to greater suffering. But Mercer, in a stunning twist, revealed he had chosen to become a double agent in his own right. Duncan had given him a choice: lead the lamb to the slaughter humanely, or let others do it savagely. Mercer chose a third path, to use Duncan's own trap to spring Clara free. Hook for next part. Mercer's audacious plan required a sacrifice so profound it bordered on the unthinkable. It hinged on a dying woman in a remote settlement, a woman who saw in her own tragic end a final powerful chance to spit in the eye of a tyrant and grant a stranger the future she would never have. Mercer's plan was a dangerous gambit of misdirection. He revealed to Clara that he had prepared for this contingency for months. He gave her a leather pouch containing $150, a small fortune, and a letter of introduction to a community of free people of color in Natchez who could help her get to New Orleans and then by ship to Mexico. Duncan would be watching all routes north. South was her only hope. But for the deception to work, someone else had to take her place. That person was Ruth Chambers, a woman dying of consumption in a small, hidden settlement of free blacks and poor whites. Ruth was gaunt, her body ravaged by disease, but her will was iron. Mercer had approached her family, offering them money that would secure the future of her children in exchange for her final act. Ruth, who knew her death was imminent, agreed. She would not just die, she would weaponize her death. Clara, insisting on meeting this benefactor, was led to Ruth's dim, herb-scented cabin. The meeting was short, solemn, and life-altering. Ruth's words were not of pity, but of purpose. "I am dying anyway," she whispered, her voice a ghost of sound. "This way, my death means something." She made Clara promise to live, to ensure her child lived, to not let her sacrifice be in vain. It was a transaction not of money, but of legacy. The next phase of the plan was set in motion. Clara slipped away at dawn to begin her perilous journey south. Meanwhile, Mercer helped the frail Ruth into the wagon, disguising her in Clara's clothes and a bonnet, with a pillow secured to mimic pregnancy. They continued north, directly into the jaws of the trap. As predicted, 4 armed slave catchers, led by a man named Porter, intercepted them on a remote road. They had legal papers, signed by Judge Crenshaw himself, voiding Mercer's sale and demanding Clara's return. The confrontation was tense. Porter was suspicious, pulling back Ruth's bonnet. Her sickly, gaunt face was clearly not Clara's, but Mercer maintained the charade, claiming illness had changed her. It was then that Ruth took control of the narrative for the last time. As Porter leaned in, demanding to know where Clara was, Ruth focused her dying energy. A trickle of blood appeared at her lips. She looked Porter directly in the eye and, with a terrifying, triumphant smile, whispered, "Gone. Beyond your reach. She is free." She revealed she had taken a fatal dose of morphine, timing her death for this precise moment. She died not as recaptured property, but as a free woman defying her captors, her final breath a verdict on their entire system. The slave catchers, defeated by a corpse, could only bury her in a shallow, unmarked grave and return to Duncan with a story of catastrophic failure. In the immediate aftermath, Duncan Fairholme was apoplectic. He spent a small fortune on slave catchers and advertisements, but Clara had vanished without a trace. The legal machinery he had so masterfully used now worked against him. Mercer's sale was technically legal, and he had no proof of the deception. Judge Crenshaw denied Mercer's request for compensation for his lost property, coldly citing the 12-cent price as proof of inherent defect. A bitter irony that surely pleased Duncan, even in his defeat. The principal players met fates steeped in poetic justice. Duncan lost everything after the Civil War, dying penniless and alone. Silas Guthrie was found dead in a shallow ditch, a so-called accidental drowning. William Fairholme was never seen again, presumed murdered on his brother's orders. Isaiah Mercer disappeared into history, his redemption perhaps complete. The story only resurfaced through a crack in a guilty conscience. Years after the war, one of the slave catchers, James Ridley, underwent a religious conversion and confessed to a Methodist minister, Reverend Hargrove. He provided a detailed account of Ruth Chambers's defiant death, a scene that had haunted him more than any violence he had ever committed. She died free, he confessed, even though the law said she was not. Reverend Hargrove documented this, but, fearing the repercussions, never published it. It was his daughter, Sarah, who, decades later, found the papers and, braver than her father, sent the confession to a small abolitionist journal, finally etching the truth into the public record. The receipt itself was rediscovered in 1998 during another renovation and now resides in the Louisiana State Archives. Clara's ultimate fate, however, is the story's great enduring silence. There are fragments a census record from 1870 in Illinois listing a Clara Freeman with a mixed-race daughter named Ruth, but it is only a possibility. This silence is, in itself, a powerful testimony. In the context of slavery, where every birth, sale, and death was meticulously documented to track property, the complete disappearance of a person is rare. It suggests not a tragic end, but a triumphant one. To vanish so completely from the system that sought to define her was the ultimate freedom. The 12-cent transaction stands as a permanent monument to a profound moral truth. It reveals that the most insidious evil is not the blatant cruelty of a whip, but the cold, bureaucratic evil of a system that makes such cruelty legal. It shows how law, custom, and the silent complicity of good men can sanitize horror. The story of Clara, William, Mercer, and Ruth is a testament to the fact that even within the most rigid and oppressive systems, humanity persists in acts of love, in quests for redemption, and in the ultimate sacrifice that breaks the chain, one link at a time. Their story was buried, but like a seed in darkness, it refused to die, waiting for the light to finally grant it meaning.